Mephibosheth is limping too. He can't, he's crippled. He, fell when he was 5. He's been crippled. He's been cared for by a servant, and he's been exiled. And here he is hiding, and yet he finds out that the king is seeking him in order to show him God's kindness. And you link kindness and goodness, and it's just so beautiful, because this is an invitation out of shame and out of hiding and into belonging that all of us need to hear and receive. And yet so many of us are too afraid to do that. We keep hiding like Mephibosheth did. And one of my favorite quotes, I jotted down a few quotes from your book, but one of them is, and I'm quoting you here, you say, "Mercy is never deserved, but always desired. And the key to unlocking mercy is simply to receive it." And that's what Mephibosheth had to learn. So tell us just tell us a bit more about him and you and us.
I can't get over grace. I can't, honestly. Don't tell anyone you're reading this, the book that I wrote 6 months ago. So it's my newest one. I really spent time talking about grace, because I can't, it seems so obvious. Like, we're Christians, we're saved by grace. It's by grace that you've been saved, not of works. It's so, like, intellectually we all understand it. But I can't comprehend this grace of God. And I think so much of the work, the deconstruction that God has had to do in me has been and continues to, it's like weeds in my heart of fundamentalism and legalism that I was convinced were not there. I grew up with an intelligent mother who taught us to differentiate between what the church pointed to as legalism and what the Bible taught and what God's heart was. So it wasn't like I was foreign. I went to a very legalistic college, but I always saw myself as someone who's observing the legalism, not entrenched in it. And yet I've observed in my life, through the pain and through the disappointment, that I have a whole lot more legalism. And I think we think of legalism as the do's and don'ts, but I think we're legalistic in the sense that we expect God to behave if we behave. So that's a form of legalism. It's like, because you're obeying God in order to get something from God. So it's a contractual thing that eradicates grace. And so when you obey, when you're living like whatever besetting sin you have, when you're not sinning, you feel God is in favor of you. When you're sinning, you feel he's not. And so then you're trying to repent out of, you want God's favor, which of course we all want God's favor, but it misses the point of salvation. And again, you can't teach someone the steps of that. You have to live. And I think sometimes, as much as I hate my seasons of failure, I feel like they have been a gift, because that's when I've experienced God's grace the most. God still stays with us. This is Peter in John 21, who has blown it, and everyone knows he's blown it. When he said he wouldn't, he denied the Lord like so publicly. And Jesus brings him and has a breakfast with him and clothes him with his grace, and then pushes him onto Pentecost, and he's leading the church. Like, it's mind-boggling. And this is Mephibosheth, the story. Like, he shows up, I'm sure, convinced he was deserved to die. There was nothing about him that should have allowed him to live. And instead, David doesn't just like forgive him or give him the land. He invites him to his stable every single day for the rest of his life. Later, David, of course, and his son Absalom and all that mess. So there's more to the story. But that the heart of David was for Mephibosheth, who should have been his enemy. And I think for me, like, I understand that. I understand this sort. I understand Jacob, because Jacob's wrestling was all about this man who God was transforming from someone who, again, thought he deserved and all the, I mean, he was told he was going to be the heir, and then he fought for what was already his. And he was a crook in some ways, and yet he still was God's chosen. And I think that boggles your mind when you live it. And who of us it's like when Jesus was sitting at the banquet, and the rich, Simon, I think was like, the woman came and pours the oil, all the nard, and everyone's like, how did she do it? And he's like, she was forgiven much, loves much. And I think this, to me, is what has been the most astounding story of my salvation. It's like, in some ways it was so obvious. I grew up in a Christian home. I gave my life to Jesus. I believe I was saved the moment I uttered the prayer as a child, but it's been this understanding of how deeply I have been given grace and how little I have to do to receive it. I want to work for grace, because it's in my nature, and in what you were saying at the beginning of the hour, like, we want to prove that somehow, even though we're saved by grace, I deserve grace, or I'm going to be a good investment that God had. And God's like, rest. And I remember I've met with my therapist for a few years now since I've worked through some of this stuff. And to me, therapy has been a gift because I'm obviously a woman of a lot of words that at some point, like people have only so much capacity. So I have to unfold the stuff, and it's been a good venue to do that in a very open space as a woman of faith that needs to, I think we people of faith are comfortable talking about our deep emotions in ways that people who don't have deep faith aren't. And so it's been a good venue for me to tease a lot of these things out. And I think in general, like I feel like this has been the work in my heart in the last few years as I've understood my motivations and my desires, and I've really seen that God is just my whole life has been trying to just tell me, like, he loves me because he's love, and like you don't have to earn it. And I don't know that I just have to just accept it and receive it. And how do you, like, there's language that I've had to understand and grow into that I still don't know that I have words for, like the stillness, like rest. Right now, the invitation God has me on is to rest. And it's like, I remember saying to my therapist in the last months, I don't even know what that means. Like, I know rest, I can give you a definition, but I don't know what that looks like in life. And that's grace, is that God is teaching me. And the lessons are sometimes hard because it means closed opportunities sometimes and closed doors and what can feel like a rejection of God, but it's really been an invitation into something better and deeper. And so I think I'm starting to understand, and I certainly am better at understanding that I want more of it. I don't know how to explain grace all the time, but I need more of it.
Yes.
And he keeps giving it.
Yeah, it is I'm hearing you describe his gentle strength stepping into your weakness in order to manifest his grace. And we all say we want the grace of God, but I think we can only truly experience his grace from our place of need. Yeah. Of weakness, of failure, of lack, of missing, of wanting, of being empty. And the problem is we're not comfortable with being needy and empty. Some of us are, it's a personality thing. Maybe it's a being raised, like, I don't know, it's a mix of personality, circumstances, nurture and nature, all of that. But for, control freaks like you and me, if I may say so, it's a little hard to understand grace. And yet we want to. And so I think I'm hearing a lot of courage in what you're saying, because you're telling God, Lord, I want to understand your grace as your gift to me, whatever it takes.